In the early days of World War II, the Battle of the Atlantic was being fought not just on the surface of the freezing ocean, but in the thin, salt-crusted air above it. The British Royal Air Force faced a logistical nightmare. They needed to protect merchant convoys from the gray wolves of the German U-boat fleet, but the distances were too vast for land-based fighters to cover. The solution was an engineering giant that looked more like a luxury cruise liner than a weapon of war, the short Sunderland. To the casual observer in 1940, the Sunderland was a majestic, lumbering beast of a flying boat. It was massive, with a wingspan of 112 feet and a deep, multi-decked hull that allowed it to land on the open sea. It was designed for endurance, not combat. Inside, it was shockingly civilized, featuring a full galley with a 2-burner stove, a porcelain flush toilet, and even a dedicated wardroom for the officers to have tea during 14-hour patrols. Because of its size and its primary role as a reconnaissance platform, the German Luftwaffe viewed the Sunderland with a mix of mockery and predatory excitement. They didn't see a threat, they saw a sitting duck. The engineering of the Sunderland was rooted in the pre-war era of Golden Age flying boats, where comfort was prioritized over aerodynamic efficiency. It was powered by 4 Bristol Pegasus radial engines that struggled to push the 30-ton aircraft past a cruising speed of 150 miles per hour. In the high-speed world of aerial combat, where German Bf-109s and UJ-88s were pushing nearly double that speed, the Sunderland was a relic. It was a slow-moving target with a massive surface area, making it nearly impossible to miss. German pilots initially treated an encounter with a Sunderland like a training exercise. Their tactical manuals suggested that because the aircraft was so large and slow, a fighter could simply sit in its blind spots, directly underneath the tail or coming in from a high-angle side dive, and dismantle the aluminum hull at leisure. The Sunderland's defensive armament was originally quite modest: a nose turret, a tail turret, and perhaps 2 guns on the top. It was meant to scare off a lone scout, not survive an organized interception by the world's most advanced air force. However, the sitting duck theory relied on a fundamental misunderstanding of the Sunderland's structural engineering. Because it was a flying boat, the hull had to be incredibly thick and reinforced to survive the crushing impact of landing on rough Atlantic swells. While land-based bombers were built with thin aluminum skins to save weight, the Sunderland was built like a destroyer. It could absorb hundreds of rounds of machine gun fire without losing its structural integrity. More importantly, its massive internal volume, designed for crew comfort, offered a unique glitch for the desperate crews flying it. There was a staggering amount of empty space inside that deep hull. When the Battle of the Atlantic intensified and German heavy fighters began hunting in packs over the Bay of Biscay, the Sunderland crews realized they didn't need to outrun the enemy. They needed to turn their flying hotel into a flying fortress. They began to look at those tea rooms, those galleys, and those observation portholes not as luxuries, but as empty slots for weaponry. This sets the stage for one of the greatest tactical miscalculations in the history of the Luftwaffe. The Germans were so confident in the Sunderland's vulnerability that they grew careless. They assumed that a plane this big and this slow had to have massive blind spots where the gunners couldn't see. They assumed the aircraft's size was its greatest weakness, failing to realize that its size actually provided the perfect platform for an unprecedented concentration of firepower. As the patrols grew more dangerous, the British and Australian crews began to ignore the official RAF armaments manuals. They started a wave of illegal field modifications, bolting extra machine guns into every available opening, from the galley windows to the flares chutes.
The stage was set for a confrontation that would shatter the German pilots' confidence. They expected to find a defenseless whale. Instead, they were about to fly head-first into a flying porcupine that spat fire from every inch of its skin. The Sunderland was about to prove that in the world of engineering, being the biggest target in the sky only matters if the enemy can actually get close enough to hit you.
The German pilots thought they were hunting a defenseless animal, but they were about to realize that the Sunderland's greatest weakness, its massive hollow size, was actually its most lethal engineering glitch. Because the aircraft was built like a flying warehouse, there was an incredible amount of internal room for unofficial, illegal modifications that the designers back in England never intended. Frustrated by being constant targets, the crews began a rogue engineering project in the coastal hangars of the Atlantic. They ignored the official armament manuals and began bolting extra machine guns into every available opening they could find. They mounted guns in the kitchen windows, cut holes in the galley floor, and rigged vibration-free mounts in the side portholes where the crew used to watch the horizon. This turned the flying hotel into a 360-degree sphere of fire. The most genius part of this evolution was the fixed forward-firing guns hidden behind small metal flaps in the nose. The Germans, who were used to attacking the defenseless front of the plane, were now flying directly into a wall of lead they didn't know existed. By the time they realized the duck had grown teeth, it was usually too late. The Sunderland had evolved into the Flying Porcupine, a bristling, armored fortress that had absolutely no blind spots left for an enemy to hide in. This wasn't just a plane anymore, it was a trap. Every window and every hatch was now a lethal surprise waiting for any pilot brave enough to get close. The once mocked luxury liner was now the most dangerous target in the sky, capable of outputting more lead per second than some destroyers. The stage was set for the ultimate test of this accidental firepower, as the Luftwaffe was about to learn that you don't hunt a porcupine with your bare hands.
The ultimate test of the Flying Porcupine's glitch engineering occurred on June 2, 1943, over the treacherous waters of the Bay of Biscay, and it remains one of the most statistically impossible victories in the history of aerial warfare. A lone Australian-crewed short Sunderland, designated N for Nuts of the 461 Squadron, was intercepted by a massive wolf pack of 8 Junkers J-88 heavy fighters. These weren't standard scouts, they were dedicated bomber killers, equipped with 20mm cannons and high-speed engines. In every military manual ever written, this was a death sentence. The odds were 8-1, and the Sunderland was over 300 miles from the nearest friendly airbase. The German pilots, sensing an easy kill, began to circle the massive boat like sharks, preparing to dive into the blind spots they had been taught existed in the Sunderland's defense. But as the first J-88 tipped its wing into a dive, the Australian pilot, Flight Lieutenant Walker, did something suicidal. He dove the 30-ton aircraft down until it was screaming just 50 feet above the Atlantic waves. By dropping to mast height, Walker used the ocean itself as a shield. He effectively deleted the bottom half of the combat arena, ensuring that no German fighter could attack from below. This forced all 8 interceptors to stay level with or above the Sunderland, funneling them directly into the Porcupine's newly modified kill zones. As the Germans swarmed, the Sunderland's interior became a scene of mechanical chaos. While the pilot wrestled with the heavy controls, the crew members, cooks, navigators, and radio operators abandoned their stations to man the illegal machine guns bolted into the galley windows and flare chutes. The aircraft didn't just fire back, it erupted. The volume of lead being pumped out of the Sunderland was so dense that the German pilots later reported they thought they were being attacked by a secret weapon.
The first J-88 attempted a high-speed head-on pass, expecting a defenseless nose. Instead, it was met by the 4 fixed hidden machine guns controlled by the pilot, which shredded the German's cockpit and sent the fighter flaming into the sea. Another J-88 tried to sit on the Sunderland's tail, only to be hammered by the rear turret's relentless stream of fire until its engine exploded in a ball of oily black smoke. For 45 minutes of continuous high-intensity combat, the Flying Hotel held its ground against an entire squadron. The heat from the machine guns was so intense that the barrels began to glow, and the cabin was filled with so much acrid cordite smoke the crew could barely breathe. By the time the remaining Germans broke off the attack, the impossible had been achieved. This single, slow boat had shot down 3 heavy fighters, likely destroyed a 4th, and sent the remaining 4 fleeing back to occupied France, their planes riddled with holes. When N for Nuts finally limped back to the English coast and touched down on the water, the ground crews were horrified. The aircraft was held together by little more than hope. It had over 500 bullet holes in the fuselage, the radio was smashed, and the tail was nearly severed. Yet miraculously, only 1 crew member had been lost. The Luftwaffe was so shaken by this encounter that they issued a formal directive. No German pilot was to engage a Sunderland unless they had a significant tactical advantage. The Flying Porcupine had officially broken the glitch in the Germans' hunting strategy. It proved that in the desperate theater of the Atlantic, a flying boat with enough illegal guns and a crew that refused to die was the most dangerous thing in the sky.